the really important thing is the DEA license address must match the address where you're receiving and delivering and administering controlled substances. If my DEA license is tied to my home address, for example, or tied to an emergency department, well, I'm not going to be able to order controlled substances to my clinic.
3, 2, 1, liftoff.
Welcome back to the Ketamine Startup Podcast. This is where we talk about how to start up a ketamine infusion clinic, how to market it, and more. And speaking of getting started, have you ever felt completely overwhelmed trying to figure out what licenses and permits you actually needed? You're used to working at a hospital where administrators handle everything, but now you're the one responsible. And honestly, you don't even know what you don't know. Well, in this episode, Sam and I are breaking down the exact license and permits required to legally open a ketamine infusion clinic. We'll cover the obvious ones like a medical license and the business permits you might be unfamiliar with. We'll even talk about the specific order you need to tackle these in. What we're sharing is based on what we did to open our clinic in Southern California, plus what we've learned from helping many other individuals like you navigate this process across different states. But before we dive in, a quick disclaimer. This information we're sharing is for educational purposes only. Licensing requirements vary significantly by state, county, and even city. Always consult with a business attorney and accountant in your specific area who are familiar with opening medical clinics. So we had fun recording this episode and hope you find it helpful. Now let's jump into the episode. To kick off this episode, what's one of the biggest pieces of advice that would you give somebody who feels like overwhelmed by this process? Because they're so used to having an administrator. This is the upside of having an administrator. They're like, here are the listings of things you need to do. And, of course, we find that annoying when it's about practicing medicine, but when it's with all this legal stuff, it's great.
I think the key is really asking for assistance. And as you had mentioned earlier, like consulting with professionals. If someone, let's say a patient is sick, they're not going to try to figure out on their own. They're going to seek professional help. And similarly, when you're starting a business, like don't try to do it on your own, like ask for professional expertise. Whether that looks like a business attorney, specifically in your state and city. Each state has their own regulations and rules and requirements. And so talking with a professional that's an expert and knowledgeable for that unique state is going to be really crucial. And also, we have a ton of resources on our website, so people can go there, go to Google. I mean, the information is available, but you also want specific advice to you. And although, someone can do like a Google search or an AI search, but I think having an expert that can apply the knowledge to your unique situation is really crucial.
And to add to that, I would say also having some folks along the way that have navigated that process, that have been in your shoes is also super helpful. And for some of you, you may not have that individual. And so you could consider this podcast episode something that you could model or use as support. Because I think the key here, one of my goals about this episode today is to have you be well-informed and feel empowered and knowledgeable enough when you do your own research and when you do get into contact with an attorney that knows how to do medical clinics in your state. And with that, let's move on to talking about perhaps some licenses and other legal type things that you already have because it's medically related.
Yeah. So the first piece is having an active medical license. That's going to be crucial because to even order medications, someone is going to need an active medical license. And the other thing is having a NPI, National Provider Identifier. And we all have that, especially if you've worked in a hospital setting, you need to have an NPI. So you probably already have one of these. But some clinics are actually creating a second NPI. So they have one for like their personal side and then one for the clinic. And that can be really useful later down the road when it comes to billing purposes, or if you decide to take insurance, having a delineation between, the personal NPI and a clinic NPI can be very helpful in the long run.
And what about the DEA license? Something that we are familiar if we're already in the healthcare. This one can be a little bit tricky.
Yeah. So for ordering normal, non-controlled substance medications, no one needs a DEA. But if you're going to order controlled substances, and that's Schedule 1 through 5, you definitely need a DEA license. And actually, I think even the DEA license, like Schedule 1, is most likely not allowed unless it's for like research purposes or other purposes. So it's mainly Schedule 2 through 5. And it really depends on some states. Like I know in Florida state, they have a separate DEA or a pharmacy license, I guess you could call it, for clinics. So they may need to get a second one. But the really important thing is the DEA license address must match the address where you're receiving and delivering and administering controlled substances. If my DEA license is tied to my home address, for example, or tied to an emergency department, well, I'm not going to be able to order controlled substances to my clinic. So the crucial part of this is that the DEA license address must be the clinic's physical location, i.e., where the medications are being delivered. So, if you are in the process of building your clinic, and let's say you don't have a clinic yet, let's say it's still in the pending process, and let's say, for example, that you, I don't know, use like a mailbox, et cetera, or a UPS store, like that's not going to be a good address for the DEA, especially if you're going to be ordering controlled substances. So we would suggest to hold off on changing the DEA license until you have the physical location of the office. That way you can order it. Yeah, I think that's kind of the DEA license. It is a little bit tricky. So again, consulting with a DEA specialist would be useful. And we actually have a podcast episode where we interviewed a retired DEA special agent, Dennis Wichern, and he also does some consulting for clinicians. So that would be a really valuable resource.
I think you highlighted something important. There's a order of operation to this, like with having to have your physical location and then have your address match it. And I feel that also means that there's an order of operation related to the business permits or the business side that we're not taught during medical education because we didn't need that to save lives and help people. And so I think that's like a nice segue into talking about like, okay, going from hey, I want to start my clinic to, okay, now I have a business bank account or now I have a business permit. So is there an order that you should go about this? And this is something that we're saying we wanted to share with folks on this episode.
Yeah, talk with an accountant or an attorney and identify the business entity type. And that may look like an LLC, an S Corp, a C Corp, et cetera. For us here in California, we started with S Corp. That's actually one of the requirements for professional medical offices is to have a professional medical S Corp. And that's really kind of like there's a bit of protection with like liability, but it's also like for accounting purposes. So it depends on the state you're in. It may be better to do an LLC, it may be better to do an S Corp, it may be better to do a C Corp. So talking with an accountant and an attorney to find out which business entity will be essential for you and which is optimal for you in your city. The other thing to consider is again, we had mentioned this having that physical location for the office, just so that things are in place. And it may be that you've signed the lease and now you're working on the build out, but still that could count as your physical location. And then the other concept is, once you get that entity is you want to get the EIN, the federal EIN, which is essentially like a social security number for a business. We're going to jump into that later, but I do want to mention here that having that will allow you to open up the business bank account.
And then you'll be able to, once you have your business bank account, your location, your EIN, then you'll be able to get the other permits. So let's talk about the business license. Like, what is a city business license and why do you need it?
So it depends on the city you're in because they're going to have various like tax requirements, but it's really important to get a license in the city that you're going to be operating in. So we're in Palm Springs, California, and it's pretty easy. Just go online, fill out some paperwork, and get that taken care of. There are different fees. You may need to pay taxes in that city. It was interesting because we're going to open in a different city and they required, taxes to be paid. But in Palm Springs, it was only on like items that one was selling. So really important to get on the city website, figure out the licensing. And, what I noticed, at least here in our city, like they're really helpful. If we have questions, we can just shoot them an email. We can go to the city hall and, they've helped multiple businesses get their licenses. So that is something fairly straightforward. The other thing is the fictitious name permit. So, it really depends on the state you're in. California, as an example, they require that you get a fictitious name permit. If you're going to be advertising your medical services, that doesn't have your name. So if you're like John Smith, MD, and that's all you're writing, then you don't need a FNP, a fictitious name permit. But if you're going to call it, I don't know, Sunrise Medical Clinic, for example, then you do need an FNP. And again, there's, a licensing fee or a fictitious name permit fee for that. And it's really important to just kind of get all your ducks in a row, especially when you're doing something cutting edge and alternative. You just want to make sure all the T's are crossed and all the I's are dotted, just to make sure there's no questions about what you're doing. So bottom line with FNP is that if it's just your name, right? Kimberly Lee, MD, Incorporated, no FNP required. But if it's going to be anything else, that's a business name, then you want to have an FNP. Now, I do want to mention that this applies to our knowledge, state of California and some other states, because, your state medical licensing board may not require an FNP.
Hey, listeners, this is Kim, and I just want to acknowledge that you're here for a reason. Maybe you're stuck in a cycle of long shifts, feeling a little burnt out, and wondering if there's any other way to practice medicine, especially on your own terms. We've been there, and that's exactly why we created this free checklist, your step-by-step roadmap to starting a ketamine clinic without those costly mistakes. Grab your copy now at www.ketaminestartup.com/checklist. It's completely free because we want you to succeed, not struggle. And hey, if you're driving or mid-workout, don't sweat it. Just check out the show notes for the link when you're ready. And again, that's www.ketaminestartup.com/checklist. Now let's get back to the episode. Which brings us to a DBA, doing business as. To me, it's like a fictitious name permit. It's like a fictitious business name, and which can be kind of confusing with a fictitious name permit. And it's something that's filed with the county clerk or a city, but it's not like a medical board thing, because I know sometimes there's some confusion about the fictitious name permit since it's related to your practice of medicine, but the name of it can get a little confusing there. But this is something separate. And again, this is at a different level. And some places, like Sam was mentioning, there's like variation. So there are some counties or cities that don't require both, or some that only require one or the other. So it's not only recognizing, am I in a state that has a corporate practice of medicine laws? There's also at that county and that city level, this other layer.
Yeah, I think the real key is going to the county website, looking it up and seeing, hey, are there any other licenses or permits or DBA? But then, you bring up in a good point, because what if the corporation name is just a corporation name, but you're not doing business, a DBA, right? So for example, let's say we called our clinic Reset Ketamine and we're doing business as Reset Ketamine. Do we need to file a DBA? And to my knowledge, I don't think you do, but there is like a county license. So I think a DBA refers to only if you're doing business with a different name than the corporation name.
I bet any of us could go and Google right now or use Perplexity or have Chat GPT tell you. There's so much information out there. Having somebody who does this for a living, a human that does this for a living, who's a professional in it, knows what questions to ask, knows what resources will have the highest quality or the correct answer that you need so you could practice safely and make sure, as Sam mentioned, cross your T's, dot your I's. Because again, it's 2025, but ketamine clinics are still kind of out there for many people. And the last thing you want to do is not have all your T's and I's dotted and crossed in a type of medical clinic that not everyone quite gets yet?
I was going to mention, the FNP, that's related to the medical board, and the DBA is more like a non-medical. It's like a city county thing. So just there is a small delineation between that. But the FNP, at least in California, when we can just speak to our own knowledge, it's related to the medical board, whereas a DBA is more like on a county or even state level. Which I guess we can jump into the EIN because I did touch upon that. And the EIN stands for the Employer Identification Number. As mentioned, it's like the Social Security number for your business. You do need to have a corporate entity set up before you can get an EIN. But yeah, it's basically a way for you to pay taxes. And you do need it for a business bank account. You need it for payroll, business taxes, etc. And you're going to do that through the IRS website. And then you'll actually even get a state EIN number or a state ID number associated once you get the federal level.
All these layers, and it's like super understandable why this can feel overwhelming because we are pointing out like all the things you need. So up to this point in this episode, we told you all the things you needed. And yet you notice each one, it's almost like, it's not like a choose your own adventure, but at each step, there are nuances as to what would be the most appropriate or what legally you need to do. And as we mentioned earlier, going over the order of what to do. And again, the idea here is that for you to be as informed as you can be when you go in first, number thing you need to do is consult with a business attorney and accountant in your state so they can help you navigate this. But when you go talk to them, if they're charging by the hour, you'll already kind of have an idea of what to talk about. And you'll know you'll need to, number 2, choose a business entity structure. You're going to apply for an EIN, secure then a physical location, open up a business bank account with that EIN you already have. Then you'll go ahead and apply for your city business license, an F&P if needed, a DBA if needed, and also consider what we had mentioned earlier about perhaps a second NPI or even a second DEA license.
Yeah. So there's a lot of licenses and permits, but the goal of this episode is kind of put things on your radar. And you don't need to become an expert at this, but to have a general sense of what's coming down the pipeline can be really useful for later when you do talk with your business attorney and the accountant. So you kind of have a clue of where you're going. That'll at least give you the baseline. So yeah, that's really important. And as far as, closing advice and some resources, you definitely want to budget enough time, especially with the DEA license. You want to look at your state specific requirements. You also want to consult with your local professionals, and definitely don't try to do this all by yourself. Right. You're going to go to experts, and don't go for the cheapest, person, the cheapest lawyer or the cheapest accountant. Like, pay good money for these experts because this is the foundation of your business.
And I really think of this like when we call a consult from another specialty or a subspecialty, and you know that there is more to, you can actually have like a working knowledge of what's going on, but you need somebody who has more insight or goes into this deeper and knows all these nuances that you chose not to dive into, right? It's, I was a general ophthalmologist, but when things got very complicated with the retina, I knew what to do, but then it got to this level that I was going, okay, there's some nuances to this that is just outside of my scope. So this is like the same things. I think I want to, allay any anxiety that you may have going, oh my gosh, this seems like a huge step. Now I got to go find a business attorney and who's the right one. And I don't want to waste my time and money. Kim and Sam always talk about keeping things lean. And now I'm going to have to find some of this blah, blah, blah. You're going to come up with these excuses. Just approach it as if you were, getting a consult, talking with an attorney. Think of it as consulting a specialist on creating medical practices in your state. And again, there are resources that are on our website. And I think Sam made a really good point. A big mistake is trying to do this all on your own and just using AI to give you the list of things to do. You need a human in the end to help you with this.
And I've used AI before, and I think it's great. Yet sometimes it does make mistakes. And I'm like, okay, when I run it by a real human being, they're like, no, that's completely wrong. Or it'll come up with fake research papers and references. And I'll Google it. I'm like, this thing does not exist. So, there's hallucinations with AI, although, it's quite useful, but it's a good launching place to be and to start. And remember, don't let perfection be the enemy of getting things done. So you just want to start the process, take one step at a time, and know that we have your back and we're happy to support you throughout. Don't recreate the wheel necessarily. Like, talk with professionals who've done it before and know that we're here to make things easier as you're going down this journey.
Thanks for tuning in for another episode of the Ketamine Startup Podcast. If you found this episode helpful, we really appreciate it if you'd leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Spotify. It helps other healthcare professionals like you discover this show and grow the community. For show notes and resources, visit our website at ketaminestartup.com/podcast. And remember, the information shared today is for educational purposes only. Always consult with qualified business attorneys and accountants regarding licensing and regulatory requirements specific to your state and location. And thanks for listening. We'll see you in the next episode.